Fantastic. Well, wonderful. Welcome, everyone. My name is Isabel Birney. I'm one of the debate coaches for the University of Vermont. We're really excited. We came to Tanzania last year for the first international social justice debate, and we're really excited to be back. I have a fair bit of experience doing this format. My sophomore year of college, my partner and I were the finalists at the national tournament in the United States. And I'm really excited now as a coach to explain sort of what this format is about. And more specifically today, what I'm going to be talking about is how to research in this format and what that looks like. So let's see if I can go to my next slide. I'm going to go over just today, like general strategy, like research in general, what's going on. I know a lot of you have research strategies already from your coursework or other debate formats. So we're just going to go over some broad things there. And then we're going to get more specific into this year's social justice debate topic and what that looks like, and sort of some of the more specific research things that I recommend for the format in and of itself. And then we'll talk about sort of what that looks like, breaking it down on the AF and the neg side. I have planned some questions at the end, but again, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to either just like unmute yourself and say something or look at the chat. I'm sharing my screen, so I can't necessarily monitor the chat, but I want questions. So that's the broad overview. And if you have a question on something that I'm not talking about or whatever it is, please let me know, and I'm happy to discuss it. All right. So general, just some research things that I wanted to talk about when we're thinking big picture, whether it's social justice debate or you're researching for your next research paper or British Parliament or whatever it is. So there's two main methods that I really think are important to think about when you're talking about research. One is like the general or the questioning. So this is like, okay, immigration, right? Our debate topic this year is surrounding immigration. So maybe it's like, okay, let's just figure out what's going on in immigration. What is my country doing when it comes to immigration? Who's coming to my country? Where are we going to, right? So it's just your questioning. So this is really when you take a topic and you're like, I just want to find out more information. I want to know what I don't know, what's going on. And the second main method of research is more specific or more focused research. So this is where instead of just focusing on immigration, you'd be like, okay, I want evidence that immigrants contribute to the economy, or I want evidence that it costs this amount of money when, we turn away asylum seekers or whatever it is. So that's when you're like, I have a specific question or statistic or whatever it is, and I'm trying to track it down or get more specific. So neither are necessarily harmful, and I would say both have their place in social justice debates and in research as a whole. I'm sure many of you have used these research styles when you're going about your classes and things like this, but I would definitely recommend, for the purposes of this debate and for the purposes of starting out, start with like a more general and a more questioning research, right? You don't necessarily want to go in with a ton of preconceived ideas of like, oh, I want this information and this statistic, right? Try to be open. And I think as debaters, these are things you're likely already apt to do, right? Is just be aware of what is the like. I just want to gather information. Our head debate coach at the University of Vermont has this saying that you're going to do all this research and maybe 10% of it will actually be used in the debate, right? So it's likely that you should find like 10 times the actual like sources and evidence that you actually want, and a very small amount of that is going to go into the debate itself. So that's okay. I would say more specific and more focused research, and I'll talk about sort of what that looks like as well. It can be really useful if it's like, okay, like you're doing one of the SPAR debates next week or the following week, or you're with your partner and you're trying to plan out and you're like, man, I just need this one piece of information on East African nations and their economic output, and I'm going to find that, right? That's when more specific research can be really, really useful. And because social justice debates are meant to be iterative, right? And they're meant to be done multiple times, whether it's over the course of just the debate tournament or you have some time in this month leading up to it, you're like, oh, now I know what I don't know and I can find it. So I recommend starting with a more general questioning research idea and getting specific. There's a couple broad tips that I want to go over, and I'm happy to go more into detail about any of this now or at the end. One is the advanced search techniques. So I have in like the notes of the slide a more specific Word document, but this is like if you're looking for like if I want to search for East African, community or states, I can put that all in quotes, right, in Google, and that will search all those words as one. So sometimes when you search for like multiple words on Google, it will break them up and make it harder to like find find those things, they'll be like, oh, here's everything related to East and everything related to African. It's like, no, 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 I need all the words together. So if you put things in quotes, it will keep things together. So there's a bunch of different techniques here. Let me pull up this document actually so that we can see this. I found a really nice like PDF that I liked to explain some of these things better than I can. So this is in the notes of this slide, and I can copy this in the chat as well. But it's like you can use quotes to search things all together. You can use this here to search like words you want plus alternatives if there's a synonym of the word. So I highly recommend using some of these advanced search techniques as you're going about your research to make it more specific. And for those of you who aren't aware, and it's tough because I can't see faces, so I apologize if this is all stuff you already know. I highly recommend going to Google Scholar. So if I'm on Google, yes, I can just Google something, and that's great. But what I really want to do, and I'm really, really lame about it and how I go about it, I have too many tabs open, as you can see. Sorry, folks. Is you want to go to Google Scholar, and it's really easy to get to. So we're just going to Google Scholar, and this will take me to Google's like academic search database. So our university has different academic databases. I'm sure yours do and may as well. But like if I'm, so when I'm searching here, I could search for like immigration and it's going to bring me peer reviewed and journal articles. So it's a little bit more specific than Google. And then I can do the same things that I can do with any other like search engine. It's like, okay, I want everything since 2021, or I want just things with, or I want just things in this date, or I want to sort it by relevance. So I highly recommend you take advantage of more specific, like advanced search things, especially when you're going after that specific research, but overall as well. So use those specific advanced search techniques, and really try to go a little bit beyond, right? Just like, I'm going to Google this word and see what comes up or whatever it is. It's like, go to Google Scholar, try to fine tune your sources. And like, if you're looking for a specific word or phrase, make sure you're finding that. Reading sources, and I definitely want to make a note about this, is I don't know, I'm getting old now too. I like love just to read the newspaper and read things, and I'll just be like, oh, that's interesting, and whatever it is. But as again, I'm sure you all know, with your careers as debaters and college students, you really want to read a lot of these sources with some more specificity, right? And I know that, and I'm going to show this, I know that with the topic statement for this debate, there were many sources already released, so there is some information that we all have access to. And when you're reading those sources, I would really encourage you, not necessarily like, oh, I want to look for this thing, but it's like, what am I finding? Like, I would definitely have a document open on my computer or on handwritten document. My handwriting is that of a 5-year-old, so I can't handwrite things because then they laugh at me. We have a whiteboard. Sometimes I'll write things down, and it's not a good situation. So, but I would like to take notes, right? So it's like, oh, that's an interesting statistics. Oh, that's whatever it is. So I would read sources with really like a debater mind, like either at the end when you're done reading the article or the source or whatever it is, or while you're reading, think like, how is this going to help me in this debate? Do I think this is useful? How am I going to like summarize this to my partner, right? Because that is something I would recommend, especially those of you here today who are like taking notes for your partner and things. Like you don't all have to read the same sources, right? You can read a source and find the key information and then share that with your partner. So make sure you're reading those sources really with an eye to the debate and with that sort of analytical part of your brain activated. You want to really, and I can't highlight this enough, you need to save your sources. So when I'm taking notes on a source, I have the citation, I have it all ready to go, and then I'm taking my notes. I'm like, here's this quote, and I like this, and this is good. So that way, when I'm writing my speech and when I'm getting ready for the social justice debate, it's really easy for me to find where did this information come from. And again, as I said earlier, it's likely you're going to do a lot more research than you may actually need in the debate. But what if someone asks you, like, hey, where did you find this information? Or where is this from? Or you get a team that's arguing for something completely different from what you expected them to, but you actually do have research on that and you want to make sure you know where it's from. So please, 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 and I'm going to keep repeating this throughout the presentation. This is something I got a master's degree in history here at UVM, and it made my paper writing so much easier, right, when I was saving my citation and saving my source instead of like doing it all at the end. So as you're researching, as you're reading, save your sources, remember where your information is coming from. And then I would experiment with different methods. We always have a little bit of trouble with this at our institution. All of our students just love to, Google things and hope for the best. But like, if you have, university libraries and things like that, like I would absolutely take advantage of that. There's lots of times we're finding like a print source or a magazine or whatever it is can be really, really useful. I would also encourage you to reach out to your communities. For this year's national social justice debates, it was on housing and housing justice. And we contacted a social worker who works in Burlington, and we got her to tell us things and pull from her life and what was interesting. So reach out to your community. Do you know anyone who's working or active in this space? And you can like pull on them for information and resources. So try to go beyond just, I'm going to Google this thing. I've used some advanced search techniques and do a little bit more there. It really will be useful. And if you are using like books and print sources, I highly encourage you to like see what is this book citing? What is this important? Like that's a great way to find more sources and evidence is to like look at what your sources are referencing. Wikipedia, we always say is a really great starting point, and I'm sure you all have heard this, is it's a great place to start and then look at the sources that Wikipedia is citing and get a little bit more specific from there. Any questions at this stage? This is my really broad general research. We're just getting started. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Please feel free to interrupt me at any point. So the next, and this is again a general thing I wanted to talk about is evaluating sources. So a couple things we want to look at. We want to look at the year. When was this published, right? When did this come out? And that's important for a couple of reasons. One is like this is a very current topic for our social justice debate. So it may or may not be useful to have a source from 30 years ago, right? Things may be changing. I would certainly encourage you all as you're reading the news and on social media and things like be looking for things related to this topic, right? Because I do think things will come out. So like what year did it come out? Is it still current? Is it still relevant? And as you know, when you're debating against other teams that are also going to be citing sources and information, like if your source is more current, that may make you more credible in the eyes of your judges and things like that. Where was it published and is there any bias? So bias is something we talk a lot about in the United States. Those of you aware of any of our political situation, it's sort of a trigger word for us. But like everything has bias. As a human, I have natural biases that I can't necessarily like eliminate. So it's not like sources will have bias, is what I'm telling you. And that's not inherently a bad thing, right? But we do want to understand and be aware of where those come from. So, okay, was this written by like a news organization? Great. Where did it come from? Does it have a particular political slant that I need to be aware of? Was this published by a governmental source and a little bit more trustworthy? Or is it going to be on the government side and I want something more critical? So just be aware of like, who is this published by? What is the potential bias? Even if it's just like a blog or a person's experience, like what is their interest in it? Make sure they're not being paid. So things to be aware of. And then again, similarly, like what's the intent? Why was this made? Is this a news story trying to get attention? Is this a government report that they have to do like yearly? Like what is the purpose of this source and how can I use this as a useful piece of information? I have a lot of folks on my team who will be like, well, can I use, podcasts and YouTube and things like that? And they can be really useful. You just want to think about like what's the intent? What's the story there? Who is producing this information? And this is where we're just going to start getting more specific into social justice debates, is you really want to think about like who is the audience of a social justice debate. And I don't know if I'm repeating Ken from last week, but the social justice debates, the reason I love them so much is they were like created to have debates in front of a real audience. So what I say by real, not that all of you all aren't real, is that we're all debaters, right? And we tend to know like, oh, that's what makes a good debate argument, and this word means I should win, and I don't care about this, like feasibility doesn't matter because I have power, right? It's like, no, these are debates in front of actual like people in the field who don't have debate experience. So ideally we'll be advocating in front of people who are, involved in immigration and in those like political issues and who aren't necessarily going to be persuaded by like a debatery mindset. So, and like Gavin is a big culprit of this on our team actually, is like you need to think about, okay, what sources and what evidence will be persuasive for someone who A, knows a lot about the topic already, who may already have extreme bias one way or another, but also who's just a regular person. They're not a debater, right? So what is a source that is convincing to them? And that's why I put year first, because I think most people are more persuaded by current information, right? So you really want to think, how do I convince an expert judge about this? So part of that is also not only are they may already have a like preconceived side that they favor, but also they are an expert on the field. They will know it if you are telling them information that's not true or if you say something that's misleading, right? So you really have to know your things because we want to prepare all of you to debate in front of these expert judges and in front of people who really know what they're talking about. So try to be thinking of the audience of social justice debates. It's not a debate judge. They're an expert in the field. What preconceived bias or idea may they have that I want to prepare for? And with that, like you want a variety of sources. So you can't just, oh, here's all my statistics. I have all my statistics that prove this thing on immigration, so I have one. That's not always convincing, right? For just like the average person or the average thing. Can I add in a story or a first person narrative? Can I talk about this thing, right? Like if you talk about trying to persuade people, we talk about using emotion is a really important thing. So can I use emotion? Yes, you want to couple that with some statistics and some numbers. Where's the credibility? Is this a trustworthy thing? So try to bring in a variety of that information. And then again, my reminder, please save the citation, right? Especially if you're arguing in front of an expert judge in this topic and in this field. You want to be able to like, here's where I got this information. Great thing you can do once we know some of the judges which I don't think have been released yet. But if we know that, like, hey, so and so person's going to be there, cite something they have written, right? Like citing something that that person has written or has published is usually very smart. We are all a little bit selfish, right? It's so
Class,
awesome to
class
hear
yeah.
things that you have said,
Debates. أنا from the
and I
research
would
debates.
definitely say that's
Merudi,
important.
Merudi.
Do we have a question? All right, I'm not hearing any questions, so I'm going to keep going. But yes, so if the judges are released and you can read anything and cite anything that they've written, I always tell my folks that you need to cite this person in your intro, or it looks really good. All right, so that's evaluating sources again. Things you may already know, but important to remember going into this. Okay, this is an example I want to test. So it's a little tricky sharing my screen, but we're going to try it. So this is one of the sources that was released with the topic statement. So this is available, I believe, to you all within the Google Drive. So this is one of the sources. It's from Guardian News, Modern Day Slavery and Domestic Workers, Tale of Abuse in the Gulf. So, and feel free to write this in the chat or like, I'd love people to unmute. Like, what do we notice about this source? What are the things we're looking at if we were going to be evaluating it? Come on, don't make me just do all the talking.
I guess I would say the year it was released and maybe its relation to the topic I'm going to be debating on, and then the source and maybe the region that it was in. And then I have to compare it with the region I'm going to be debating on.
Absolutely. And Ebenezer in the chat says the date it was published and possible bias. I think that's great. So it's 2022. So that's like kind of current. Again, I was like a 2000s baby, so I just feel old nowadays. But yes, so like it's 2022, kind of current. It's The Guardian, which is a UK-based news source. So I do think Ebenezer's pointing out there may be some possible bias. I know, I feel really old. It's sad. I just came from working with a bunch of like 12-year-olds though at my second job, so they make me feel so old. But this is probably not too old, but it is from like a news source in the UK. This is known as a more liberal leaning news source. But also it's sort of like, oh, we are old out here, but it's also sort of like a Western perspective. So those are all things I would take into account. It doesn't necessarily discredit anything that this article says, right? But those are things I want to have in the back of my mind. And then as Gabriella was saying, I should compare it with some other ideas, right? Let's take a look then at this other one. So this is another source, again, from the list of sources that have been released. So this is from the African Union. It's a report on migration statistics in Africa. What do I notice about this source? How is this different from the first one?
I guess I would say since it's with the African Union, so I would feel like this would be a more credible source because it's able to like figure, okay, it has a first-hand opinion on like what is going on within the region. And yeah, I guess that's it.
I think that's exactly right. You'd be like, okay, it's not a news source. It's from the African Union. It's, 2021, so it's still very current. And it's going to give me like maybe just the facts and the figures perspective, right? So again, it's not to say that the Guardian source is necessarily inherently bad, right? But it is an idea of like, okay, African Union, probably more first person perspective, more those things. So it's great to have a mix of these, right? Draw on news articles, draw on government reports, draw on those first person narratives, but just be aware of what you have in those things. I'll call out there's one source on the pre-released sources that's from like 2010, and I haven't read it myself, but to me 2010 might be a little older of a source for this debate. And maybe it's not, maybe it's great background information, but just that's something to be aware of. So that's evaluating sources. Thank you so much for participating and letting me get some water. And now we're going to keep going. Okay, so I want to get more specific. Oh, did I miss a slide? Here we go. I missed a slide. Here we go. Topic. So, and I'm sure you've all heard the topic before, but let's talk about this in terms of research. So, a just migration system in the East African community is best achieved through the full implementation of the common, and I'm missing this word. Can I make this small? Uh-oh. The common protocol rather than prioritizing isolated recruitment and protection measures. So let's talk about this a little bit in terms of research. And obviously there's a whole like lot of information in the topic slide as well. Does anyone need the topic slide? I did include that in my slides if anyone wants it. I'm just going to drop it in the chat so that I don't.
Yeah, please help us with that. That'll be.
Yeah, I'm going to drop it in the chat. So that I like to be very prepared. Okay. So that is a link to the Google Drive that has the topic statement with a big long thing. And then it also should link you to the sources as well that have been released. You just like download the zip file and you should be able to download those PDFs. Is that working? Let me know if it doesn't work. How about that? So this is our topic for our social justice debates. Okay, so we want to start, and I know that there've been some sources released. We can talk about those sources in a little bit. What do I want to look at when I'm looking at these sources and this evidence? What's the first things that like come to mind? Oh, wait, I stopped. Let me resume that. Dude, so sorry. I forgot. There we go. This is why I can't technology, folks. What's good to remember those. This stuff will happen. You will lose your source and you will go completely crazy and you just have to sort of keep going, Sort of it's part of life. So what are the first things that I would want to look at with my partner, with ourselves? What are the first things that jump out at you? And feel free, those of you who have joined, you can write this in the chat or shout it out. I am asking for audience participation. That's the teacher and me. So we're looking, this is the social justice debate topic. If you were about to debate this, what would be the first couple things that you would be thinking about? I'll start with mine. I'll put it in the chat. This is the first thing that jumps out at me when I see this is just migration system. Because like, what does that mean? You know what I mean? And that's something we can look at the topic slide to see a little bit more defined. But that's the first thing that I want to know because that's the whole goal of the debate, right? Is resolved a just migration system. So what is that? What does that mean? How do I define that? What else? What else jumps out at us when we are looking at this motion? Common market protocol. Yes, absolutely. And that's in like big bold letters too. So what is a common market protocol? Like how is that going to impact things? Is there a specific definition? Are there different interpretations? Absolutely. Um, and then also that goes with that, right? Like full implementation. I can't talk and type at the same time. It's really bad. But like, what does that mean? Does that mean that there have been partial implementations? I would think, is there evidence I can draw in there? What does that full implementation imply and hold me to, maybe as affirmative? Ebenezer is saying the East African community, absolutely. And that's like, I think pretty consistently defined, right? But like, what does that mean? Who are those states? I'd probably want a list of here are the countries that are in the East African community that I can start pulling examples from. Cecilia is saying the East African community migration policies. Yeah, absolutely. So that's not even in the topic slide, right? But Cecilia, you're thinking like, what are those policies? What do they look like now? And probably how would they change, right? If they would be implemented. That's awesome. Fantastic. Gabriella is saying that the migration system in East African communities adopted measures that have been implemented and they're going to be implemented. How would these measures have been adopted in the region? Yeah, absolutely. So what does it look like when we're adopting common market protocols? I would probably be thinking, again, regardless of side. So I don't know or really care about what side I am, but it's like, what does it look like when different countries adopt these protocols versus not, versus a partial adoption versus not? Absolutely. Really, really good. How have these measures affected the region's economies? Yes, how they affected the economies, how they affected the immigrants, the people, right? All of those things. Because that to me would be part of just, right? Like a just migration system would imply some level of like fairness across probably multiple playing fields. My other one would be the isolated recruitment, right? What is the alternative? This is where it looks like we have some more, not wiggle room, but there's more like freedom in the definition, right? So where on the affirmative, I'm probably going to have to argue for these common market protocols and a full implementation, right? That's pretty clearly defined. What does it look like what do these isolated recruitment and protection measures look like? Like, what is that? You know what I mean? What does that mean? What are my options there? What can I do, right? So this is fantastic. So to sum up, and I'm not taking notes because I'm sharing my screen, but these are fantastic things. We got to figure out what a just migration system is, what that means, what that looks like, all those things. We need to talk about like common market protocols. What does that full implementation look like? Where do those things happen, right? What countries are those going to be a part of? And this is great to get a list of countries so that I can know here's where I should pull information from, here's where I should be reading news stories of, because again, I really do encourage like read some current modern day news stories to find this information. What are those perspective? I don't need to start with, oh, I need this thing, I need this affirmative thing, I need this negative thing. No, it's just what are the immigration policies currently and how would this cause change? And like, how would they be adopted? How would this affect economy? What is isolated recruitment and protection? Like, what is the alternative if we're not talking about common market protocol? What are the alternatives there? Any other general things we would want to highlight? So we're just generally focusing on these things. I think this is a great list. I really like this list. So I would encourage, and all of us have sort of just done it, but I would encourage you with your partner, by yourself, whatever it is, like start there, right? So you want to start with, okay, here's the topic, here are the things, I got to figure this stuff out. So again, and this is what I would do in all of my debates is before I get into here's my affirmative, here's my negative, I need to find this information. It's just, no, like what do I need to understand about this? And this is why I highlighted too, like you need to sort of have an idea of what you're reading these sources for. I don't want to, excuse me, just go in and like read a bunch of sources. It's like no, now if I read the sources, right, that we have released, it's like, okay, what is the common market protocol? What is the intended effect on the economy? I know I'm trying to get to a just migration system. Does this have any impacts there, right? Like figuring that stuff out. So you're just trying to get like a wide breadth of like context ideally you're arguing in front of these expert judges who really have familiarity with the topic. So you like sometimes, at least when we debate British parliamentary debate, our debaters can get up there and really, make some stuff up and sort of get away with it, right? Because it sounds logical or it might be true or whatever it is. And they don't know. They don't know the topic. They haven't researched it. But this has been released. We have over a month to research and prepare. So you should really show up with a good understanding of what this is. Think about it like in any of your courses you've been given like, 6 weeks to write a paper. Your professors would expect a pretty good paper right by the end of it. So start with context. So we just had a whole list. I would use this chat as a list of things like, okay, do I have these things? Am I understanding these? I don't think there's anything else I would highlight. So I want to come up with that list and that idea. Then once I've done that, and I might go to my next slide, and I might not, is then I want to break it down by sort of sides. So I want to start thinking about affirmative and negative. So if I'm the affirmative side of this debate, I am arguing for the resolve. What are some things that I might start like arguing or thinking about? Can we put some of those in the chat? So if I'm on the affirmative of this debate, I'm arguing for the full implementation of the Common Market Protocol. What are some things you might start like looking into or questions you might have? Things you might try to prove. If you just joined, we're trying to think of some affirmative ideas for what might we try to prove or what ideas might we try to argue if we were the affirmative in this debate. What research questions would we start at? Ebenezer says the Common Market Protocol has been effective historically. Yeah. So let's say that it has been effective historically, that it's helped people. So and I like this question too, Ebenezer, because it's pretty broad, right? Like you could go into it's been effective in helping people in the host country or the, other country or economically or keeping people safe, right? There's a lot there. So I really like that. I think that's a good broad question. Any other ideas for affirmative? There we go. Gabriella says that it impacts. How has it impacted those nations? To what extent have those nations adopted the policies? Yeah, I think, and that's something too that sometimes the expert judges ask for a little bit more than regular debate judges like myself is like, can we do this? Right? Because they've often been advocating or being policymakers in the space, and they're like, well, but nobody's going to adopt this, but nobody's going to implement this. So, like, I think that's a great question. Is like, excuse me, to what extent have other nations like adopted this and how is it useful and all of those things? Absolutely. Those are great. Common market protocol. Cecilia says common market protocols in relation to human and labor rights. Absolutely. So like what impact, what effect does that have on like human labor and production and all those things? So those are great ideas. The ones from the topic statement, we were given some like sample test cases, so I wanted to include those as well. So one is like that structure barriers are the root cause, and we need to fix these things sort of first, right? So that this common market protocol can be really important here to those effects. The other thing is like economic growth through free movement. So like the common market protocol and free movement will help cause this economic growth, just like we were talking about. That it can reduce irregular migration and human trafficking. So you might look at like what are the levels of human trafficking and things like that. How can they be improved if this is implemented? Can they be improved? And that's a great thing probably if you're looking for human trafficking and migration is like get a narrative from someone who maybe has been through this or worked in the field. Also pair that with some statistics of what's happening. And what's the political will and regional coordination, right? Like that's probably something that's really useful in the affirmative is like, do people want this or want to do this? Often in these debates, and it's pretty clearly defined, the topic statement does a great job of explaining what the affirmative for and what the negative is arguing for. But I think that it would be really, really useful to know, like, what are politicians, advocating for? And also, will there be backlash from the people? And immigration is something that, at least in the United States, and I think really globally, causes lots of folks to get angry, and it's immigrants make great scapegoats as we all know, but it's like will the local population be impacted and like this or not like this and things like that. So and this is again, so you can start here, and again, this list, I think this is all of them. This list of affirmative ideas here and that we have in the chat. This list, all of these things have more advanced like readouts in the topic statement, but then I would go through and be like, okay, what is the truth here? Do I like this? Like these are all sort of examples of things that you could argue on the affirmative, but nothing that you have to argue on the affirmative. So once you've got some context, I would then go through and like, what are the affirmative things that I want to argue for? How might I go about this? So if I have this list, I'm going to be trying to look at like other regions and how are they adopting like immigration protocols and how is that different from common market? And I'm going to look at like human labor and human trafficking and what are the numbers there? I'm going to look at like the effectiveness and like economic growth, right? Economic growth is probably something I'm putting in quotation marks and searching on my search bars, trying to do that. So absolutely. So these are great ideas. So let's go back for a second. And shockingly, I'm going to ask you the same question, but on the negative. So what would you say? You're on the negative of this debate. You're arguing against this thing. What might some things you be? Like, what might some research questions you have when you're going about this? Maybe what's an argument or an impact you're going to make? You're on the negative of this debate. What might you argue? Try not to read from the topic statement if you've seen where those are. What might you say on the negative? What's an argument you might want to make? When I was learning how to be a teacher, they said the hardest thing to do is to have silence after you've asked a question. And that was before Zoom. So I know it's also getting late there, so I'm gonna give folks another 30 seconds, and if not, I'll give you some of the ideas. But you're on the negative. Come on, you've all done debates before. You're gonna have to argue against this. What are you gonna say? You're doing so well, folks. I don't know how much audience participation we have, but we've been doing great. And you get to check this off. Like I've already started my cases. Woohoo.
Hello. I would say
Sorry, someone
I
is
would.
speaking, but I can't hear you.
Oh,
You're a little quiet, Cecilia. I think that's you.
gosh, my mind.
Yeah.
I would research on. I would research on like the trends of the isolated recruitment, which nations are participating in it more and to what extent, and also again in their relation to human rights, and whether they uphold sovereignty and economic effectiveness in that way.
Yes, so I think that's a great answer. Thank you so much for participating. So, like, what is the isolated recruitment? Who are the countries doing this? Sorry, I'm trying to put some of this in the chat. Who are the nations doing it? How effective is it? What are the consequences on the country, economy, things like that? So all of those things are things I would definitely want to be aware of, right? Because I'm probably like one of my arguments might just be, well, no, like economically, like I'm sure one of my impacts on the affirmative is the common market protocol is better for the economy, and I'm sure one of my impacts on the negative is that isolated recruitment and protection measures are better for the economy. Yes, migrant perspectives on both, Gabriella, absolutely. So I want a first person narratives for both and negative, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, negative's a little tough. Let's see what Eben and the topic statement got us. Ebenezer, thank you. National security and sovereignty is a threat. Absolutely. I think on negative, those of you who do a lot of framing on British parliamentary debate, I think on negative, I would probably frame security as tricky or as a key thing to focus on, right? So some of the negative ideas is like, does this lead to the exclusion of low-skilled or informal workers, right? Like that's something to consider. Like, does this mean that we're only letting the really high-skilled folks get through? And then what does that do to my economy if I don't have informal workers in it as well? Does this cause the exploitation of East African workers abroad? If we don't have this community, does it hurt like the folks at home? What's the enforcement issues with regional policies? I think enforcement and like the sort of feasibility is something that I would definitely look at with the Common Market Protocol. Is like, what does this look like? Does this change based on who's in office and who's in the executive? Things like that. And then the argument that like urgent protection is needed now. So like, is Common Market Protocols or informal protections like quicker? Like, how long will it take to implement these things? And like, think about the timeline, right? All of those things are really, really crucial. So again, I believe all of these 4 things that are on the slides are expanded on in the topic statement and great places to get started. But I'd also really just encourage you again with your partner. And we just did it here, but it's like, think, what do I think? And again, I would probably do this once I have some context and some understanding of what like common market protocols and informal like and protections are, but it's like, what are some of the arguments I might make? What do I want to do? And this is not to say that these have to be your arguments, right? Like, maybe I don't think that national security and sovereignty is a threat, but it's like, these are the things as I'm doing research, I maybe want to start being aware of and pulling information out of. Right? So it's like, I can come with some ideas to sort of start help honing my research because the joy of the internet is we have unlimited information at our fingertips, and the downside of the internet is we have unlimited information at our fingertips. So trying to figure out some ways to narrow down and focus that is really, really important. All right, we're going to go on from AF and NEG, but thank you all for your participation. So we're going to go into during the debate, and then we're going to have some time for questions. So I get these questions a fair bit when I'm talking with people about how to do social justice debates for the first time. So this is not necessarily related to how to do the research. This is a little more specific to once you've got the research, what do I do with it during the debate, right? And there's some nuance here. So let's talk about this shortly. So shockingly, because it's like the 3rd time I've said it, you want to cite the information and you want to cite it in your speeches. So I know you've saved all your sources since you've been doing all your research and you're at this talk. Now you want to make sure you explain the information. So you don't need to like list the whole, like I showed earlier in the presentation, the whole like long, like formal APA or MLA is what we use in the United States citation. You don't need that, but it's just like, as the report from the East African Union in 2021 states, right? Like, so who published it and like what year was it from, right? That's sort of all you need to orally cite the information. If there's an author or a scholar, you may cite according to this person. If that's one of the topic judges and you're citing them, you should definitely say their name when you do so. But it's like, cite that evidence in your speech. And again, that doesn't have to be a long thing, but it's like, oh, I'm going to cite this statistic. Let me say where it's from, right? Things like that. So use that. You should be using all the research when writing your speeches, and then you should be citing it in your sources. So ideally, you've done your research, you found your context, you've come up with some AF and NEG ideas, you've done your research, then that's when you can get into writing your speech and adding that evidence in there. I would have your research ready. So I always loved being like the second speaker and doing the second speeches, but I didn't write that whole one out. And I really don't recommend writing that whole thing out because for me, that was so dependent on what the other team was going to say. And I don't know what they're going to say, right? Until they get up and debate. So I would have what we call them blocks on our team. So it's like, okay, here's my block on national security and why it's worse under, central market protocols. And here's my block on this thing. And here's my, so I would have all my research ready, sort of ready to go and easily accessible. So one of the great things, is that you can have your computer and have that up during the debate. So I know in British parliamentary and in many other debate formats, it's all handwritten. This does not have to be handwritten. You can use computers. You also can use paper. But however you do that, like have your research ready. Like sometimes my students will just have like 18 billion tabs open. And I'm like, no. Like, this is why you should have kept like your sources ready to go. And ideally, like, here's my source and here's what it says. That way I can go to my research document and be like, oh, they want the evidence on Tanzania. I have that year, whatever it is. So, try to have that research ready and easily accessible. And this is something you can practice in some of like the SPAR debates or practicing with your partner or whatever it is, but have that easily accessible and ready. And then during the debate too, like take note of what you need. Like, okay, you hear a case about, what did Musa just say? You hear a case about local economy and boosting local economies, and that local economies are the most important thing. I don't have any evidence for that. We need to find some before the next debate or before tomorrow or whatever it is. Or, whoa, that team had a great source on this thing. I wrote it down. Can we try to find it and steal it for our side, right? Our team is always doing that. Is like, wow, that was a great piece of evidence. We need that piece of evidence. So try to be note of like, are there any holes in my cases or my research, or is there good evidence that I'm going to grab from the other side as well? That's totally acceptable and totally okay, and as you should do. Oh, and I didn't write this down, though I should have. One thing that I will say, and some of you may have experienced this if you've done other like research debates, is it can be sometimes, I started in high school doing research debates, but they can be kind of tricky, especially if you're coming from a more extemporaneous format, to get into it, because the first speech is so often like it's fully researched, it's fully written, and then afterwards it's not so much. And sometimes it's like, well, wait a minute, I don't have a statistic that states that, you know, nuclear weapons won't immediately blow us all up if we do the central market protocols. How do I argue against it? And it's like, no, 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 you're a very intelligent person, right? You're a debater, you know this. Like, it's okay if you don't have evidence for everything. And I know I've spent the last, 40 minutes explaining how to research and how important that is, but like, fundamentally, like, it is okay if you don't have a source to refute every single thing. You should still be flexible and make sure that you are able to, like that's why you've done so much research, right? You have a lot of ideally background about the context. You've got so much more research than you need. If you can't find it for whatever reason, or you don't have time, or you just don't have that piece of evidence, it's okay to just use your like logical human brain and be like, well, that's incorrect for these reasons that make sense, or because of this thing that I do have evidence for, it's unlikely that that would be true, right? So as important as the research is, it's really critical not to be tied to it. Like, you can say things that are not cited and should say things that are not cited, right? Experts and politicians don't get up there all the time and it's like, I'm only talking from the things that I have published. No, they're using their brains. So it's a tricky balance, figuring out how do I fit this research in, but then also use it to enhance my debate and not to limit my debate to just what that is. Hopefully, I've articulated that. But yeah, during the debate, it takes some practice, I would say. I would really, really make sure that you practice with your research. So I know there's some scrimmage debates that will hopefully happen in the next week or two, and you may not have all the research ready. And a lot of our folks on our team get really nervous. They're like, well, I don't have a case. I'm not ready to do this. And it's like, that's okay. You're still a smart debater, right? And you don't have to know absolutely everything and have a source for everything to be able to make that argument, and just see how, right? Like, arguments sometimes just need to like live and breathe in the world, and we can see, oh, that's actually a terrible idea, or wait, that's great. You need to now you need to prove it, right? So it's all right if you're not fully prepared, or not as prepared as you like, or haven't been able to do all the things that I've suggested. But as best you can, you want to come prepared, and then argue smart. So that's all the like formal stuff I have. I've been talking for a long time. Thank you all for participating and putting in your ideas. Hopefully, I put the links in the chat for the topic statement, which I really encourage. So the topic statement, last thing I'll say, and then I swear I'll stop talking. The topic statement has a bunch of sources on there that, again, you can download as zip files. You could start there if you wanted. I don't think that's a bad place to start. I would definitely encourage you and your partner to like do that sort of contextual brainstorming like we practiced earlier. But then also, when you're reading those sources, try to read them with like, where do I think this would be useful? And they're added on the main folder for SJD. Fantastic. So like, make sure to read them. If that's the only research you do, at least read those sources, right? But I wouldn't stop there, right? I would use that as a starting point. Again, I think one's from 2010. I don't know. I haven't read it yet. We'll see how relevant that is. But like, please make sure that like, read those, think critically, how are they useful, and then find more stuff. Go to your libraries, go to the Google Scholar and the advanced searches on the internet. But don't just, I would encourage you, that's a fine place to start. Don't stop there, but definitely go beyond. And with that, there's a fair bit of sources there. Divide them up. Like, you know what I mean? If you have a partner or two partners, be like, great, I'll read these. We're all going to take notes and see what they are. So that's a great way to, and that's, I would really encourage, it's a great way to start working with your partner. I think like working and getting that comfortability in a partner relationship with your debate partner is really crucial. And starting with this research is a great way to start. So I'm done now. What questions do you have? Please feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. I would love to answer questions. All right, Ebenezer asks, how do you question the validity of the opposition sources effectively? That is a great question. And I will say, and I know I said this earlier, it can be a real problem in these debates, is the affirmative goes, well, I have this source that says this, and the negative goes, well, I have this source that says this. And as Ebenezer's alluding to, that's what I call like an example war. And you can't just be like, well, I had a source, Judge. Why didn't you care about my source? You have to sort of question the validity and what's going on. So one is very upfront, Ebenezer, and that's just in like cross examinations, is just saying like, hey, like, where's your source from, and where's that piece? Like, especially if they're not citing it, right? If they don't give you the author and the date, you can be like, well, what you said that $200 billion will be raised if we just do the closed market protocol. Where are you getting that information from, right? So it's one is just like if they haven't given you the citation, ask for the citation. But then also, if it is from like a news source or things like that, like ask about those things. Like, are you aware that this is like a news source and doesn't have close-up personal relationships with the East African communities or things like that? So I'd focus on like the date and the authors and things like that. It's totally fair to ask for the source or ask for that understanding. But then in addition to questioning the validity, so you can say, hey, I have these concerns about your source. Like we've had debaters who have like found the sources and the studies and been like, well, that the sample size was only 15, right? So if you find that information, be like, hey, are you aware that like that survey was only based on like one nation or one community or whatever it is, but then also use that to prove that like, hey, my source is better. So I would say like ask for the citation, you can question specifics if you have them, and then also you should show that the information that you're bringing is like more accurate and truthful and current and more like honest overall and has like less harmful biases. Does that make sense? But I would say like cross examinations are great places to do that. You can bring it up in speeches, especially third speeches, if you think it's been really crucial. Otherwise, I would say do that on cross examination. There's any other questions, again, I'm gonna try to take a look. No, I'm looking at the chat. Never mind. But yeah, I'm here. Please don't be shy. I know it's late for you. It's the middle of the day for me. I want to answer your questions while we're all present. No silly questions either. Yeah, please, Renson.
Now for the third speaker, because that person doesn't do the cross-examination questions. So is there any likelihood of them getting like lesser speaker points in comparison to the first and the second?
That's a great question. I would say in my experience, so two things. In my experience, no, that hasn't happened. And usually, these tournaments are pretty good about explaining to the judges sort of how they should and shouldn't evaluate things. What I will say, while you as a third speaker don't have the opportunity to answer questions for cross-ex, you probably should be one of the people asking questions. And I don't think this is necessarily a hard rule or more of a like firm suggestion or guideline perhaps is like, let's say I'm on a team of three and my first and my second speaker are going, and maybe my first speaker is going to ask some questions. I, as a third speaker, should make sure I'm one of those people asking questions, right? Because I don't have that opportunity to respond, I should have the opportunity to ask those questions for sure. So I maybe want to take like a more central stand in that question time. But generally, no, it doesn't impact cross-examination. We could do a whole hour, quite honestly, on cross-examination. The cross-examination, I don't want to say it's overlooked by judges, and I will say expert judges love cross-examination. Like they get into the questions, they love it. But also, it only impacts the debate if you then, as the second and third speakers, bring it into the speeches. Yeah, we definitely need a workshop on cross-examination. Our team honestly should show up to that. We're okay at it. you have to bring that in. So let's say the first speaker and they had a good back and forth and cross-examining you as the second speaker, you as the third speaker, bring that information in there. Be like, hey, this was what's discussed. We question the validity of this source. It's not accurate. Or hey, we went back and forth on this thing. They didn't have an answer for that, right? So definitely like cross-examination is really important. And you as a third speaker can probably get some speaker points if you show, hey, I was listening, I was on it, and our team did really well. That shows great like team cohesion as well. So bring those cross-examinations into the third speeches. So great question. I hope I answered that.
Yeah,
Awesome.
sure. Thank you.
Any other questions? And yeah, it's okay if it's not super research specific. I've taught this format and competed in this format for many years now. Okay,
Excuse
Gabrielle
me.
asked, wait, we've got a chat question, and then Neville, I'll get to you. Can you explain the roles of the speaker two-person team? Neville, I'm going to answer Gabrielle's question first, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, a two-person team and two or three-person teams are both common, so it's not an issue at all. So a two-person team generally, let's say you have speaker A and speaker B. Speaker A might speak first, speaker B might speak second, and maybe speaker A would probably speak again third. Let's say that's the affirmative side. Maybe on the negative side, then speaker B will speak first, speaker A will speak second, and speaker B will speak third. So generally, what we recommend for two-person teams is to do the first and the third speech, and then just swap for the AF and the neg, because you want to make sure, and like these debates are about learning and education, so you want to make sure that you're getting some experience with different speaker roles. Like on a three-person team, I would really discourage and probably not allow my debaters to do the same. Like I don't want to be the first speaker for the affirmative and the negative on a three-person team. On a two-person team, I would recommend doing first and the third because it will give you time to like plan that speech and write it out, and you can like plan out the cross-examination speakers really well. But just swap it on the negative. Some people do like give the second and third speeches. So like speaker A would give the first speech and speaker B would give the second and the third. Really, I just want to highlight, sort of piggybacking off of Renson's question, is you want to make sure that everyone sort of gets opportunities in cross-examination. It's not just like one person doing all of that. But again, I like first and third better. That's what I did on a two-person team. But it is sort of up to you. So that's something that I would definitely communicate with your partner about. I don't think there's any like strict hard and fast rules for this tournament, but I really just like the guidelines we mainly follow are like everyone should try to participate in cross-examination, things like that. Neville, what's your question?
Okay, first of all, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know how familiar you are with the British parliamentary system.
Yeah.
There are very strict guidelines on the roles of the speaker, from the prime minister to the deputy prime minister. And from my experience with it, it doesn't give a lot of room for cross-examination. You only get, say, one POIs. So my question to you is, what is the best way to frame a question during that situation? Because you only get around one chance to give a POI, point of information, if I'm not wrong.
Well,
yeah, I would like to know what is the best way to frame that question.
Yes. So great question. Yeah. I think and I also coach British parliamentary, so I'm very familiar with that format, and I know that Friss is saying that we're going to have a whole recording on speaker roles very soon, so this may get into that a little bit, but you do have in this format. So in this format, you're going to have a 6-minute first speech and then 4 minutes of cross-examination by the other side. So it's not like BP where you have a POI where I only have one chance and things like that. So in this format, you're going to have 4 minutes to ask questions of that other speaker and 4 minutes, to respond and answer. So there's a little bit more time to do that. So I would say when you're setting up questions in BP, right, you have to be very much like, here's my whole question. It's 15 seconds. It's short and to the point. I would say in social justice debates, it's a lot more like, I have a multi-part question. Like, hey, don't you acknowledge that the common marketplace it does this thing? And hey, wouldn't you agree that this thing is good? So don't you think you're terrible? You know what I mean? So I would say in this format, cross-examinations can often be like a little bit more set up and planned and strategized because you have more time than in BP. Does that sort of start to answer your question, Neville?
Yes, but now my question was in BP. It's good. Among the things you've said that you only have 15 seconds. Yes, that is true in BP. So I want you to go to the British parliamentary system. That 15 seconds that you have, leave alone this social justice debate that you're going to have. Now, in VP, how can I get from the question with that little time?
How can you so in BP, when you only have 15 seconds, I recommend like writing it down in advance, right? Because you only have that one chance when you raise your hand. So you just want to be like, okay, I want to ask about this thing, like I want to try to catch them. So I recommend writing it down in advance. And then the other thing is like for this whole speech, I've had my phone like, timing, so I know how long I take. Like you can set up the like lap feature on the iPhone at least to like lap it, and then you can be like, great, now I'm at 2 seconds, 3 seconds, right? So it's like 15 seconds is a much longer time, I think, than sometimes it feels in our head. And start with the most important piece of information, right? So it's like if I want them to acknowledge a piece of evidence or statistic or whatever it is, I'm going to start with that and then be like, how do you respond or whatever it is. So write it out, plan it out in advance, and try if you can to coordinate with your partner on what that question is. Does that make sense? Otherwise, I'm going to go back to the question I know on this format that I know Gabriella has.
Yes, thank you. Well answered.
So Gabriella asks, as the first speaker, can I have a pre-written speech? Absolutely. And that's encouraged, and I apologize for not going over it more. I'm trying not to repeat stuff that may have come up in other workshops, but I recommend to all my students, so treat it like a research paper, truly. And I know many of you will do those for classes and things like that. So you want to take this, couple weeks, 4 weeks, maybe, and write the speech. So do your research, come up with ideas, and then write out those first affirmatives and first negatives. So you have that time. So I would strongly, and it doesn't have to be necessarily word for word written out, though many of my debaters do write them out pretty much word for word. But it's like, all right, here's my main ideas. It's all ready. I don't personally recommend writing out your second or third speech. I do for my second speech. Again, I have blocks. So I have sort of ideas of here's what I'm going to say. Maybe my partner's first speech is too long. So I have one of their points they couldn't fit in that first speech, right? But my second and third speeches, I have information and things that I'm ready to say. And if I've done some practice or spar debates, maybe I have my old third speech and I can just tweak it and things like that. But I really, so first speech, yes, fully written out, and you can have your computer with you during the debate and all those things. But I don't recommend writing out the second and third speech. I recommend for the second speech more of an outline or some ideas. And then the third speech is, to me, much more free form and very similar to a British parliamentary like whip speech almost. Yeah. Great question. Any other questions? I know we're coming up on an hour, so.
As speakers digest and come up with their questions, I have a question to them. How many are ready to do a spa next week? You can just type there because we are planning some spas, and I was genuinely trying to see how best to have to recruit quote unquote speakers for the spa. So if you're interested, either you individually or as your team, please just let me know in the chat. Okay, Ebenezer has a question.
Ebenezer has a question, and I will say too, I encourage everyone to do them. Like, even if you don't have a ton of time to research or whatever, like do the SPAR debates. They're so helpful. And Ebenezer says, as a second speaker, should I prioritize having several varied information points or just a couple of points of information explained in detail? What strategy is more effective? That's a tough question, Ebenezer. You sort of hit on the head of it. I sort of freak out, right? Because I don't know what the other side's going to say. So as a second speaker, like, part of me just wants a lot of information, right? Like, ooh, I have a counter to this, and I can refute this, and I can rebut this. But also, obviously, going into like detail can be much more persuasive, especially for expert judges, right? We always want to be thinking about the expert judges who we're ultimately trying to advocate in front of. So I would say that it's sort of a mixture, and it's what you're comfortable with, right? So as you like hopefully do these SPAR debates and things like this, are you able to are you comfortable with what you have? Like, do you think you have enough information to respond? Otherwise, I would say maybe I probably from my side, like if I'm affirmative and I'm second speaker, I probably just have more in-depth points that I know I want to go into. Maybe I have one extra in case the negative is really weird or something, but then probably I have a lot more on rebuttal. And ultimately that ends up being really helpful, right? Because I'll argue both sides and I've done research for both sides. But I would say that's not a great answer, Ebenezer. I apologize, but I think some detail for my side, and then a little bit more variety for my response. It is only a 6-minute speech, right? So even though it's Well, it's shorter than a British parliamentary speech, and it's not forever. So it's not like a 20-page research paper. It's only 6 minutes. So a combination of the two. And I will say, if anyone has a question on like how do I divide up research with my partner, which is maybe something I should have addressed. Generally, when I'm meeting with students at University of Vermont, we'll have one, like if it's a 2-person team, we'll have one person sort of like take point on the affirmative, and maybe that person's going to be the first affirmative speaker and write that speech and do that research. And then we'll have one person sort of take point on the negative. If it's a team of 3, they might divide up similarly, but ultimately you do want to be doing research on both sides, right? So usually I research mainly for the speech that I'm sort of preparing and writing, but I want to have a really good like contextual understanding of the whole debate. But usually I do talk with my partner or partners about like, okay, how can I divide up this research? What makes sense here? But ultimately you should like be really comfortable with both sides. Though of course sometimes we have favorites, right? We're like, I really want negative in this final round or whatever it is. But just a note that I would definitely consider how are you going to divide up the research. There's lots of different ideas about that. I would say it's just partnered preference.
Okay, I think it's 41 and 42, so we can have like 3 minutes, then close it at 45. Um, yeah, so guys, if you have comments, questions, feel free to ask them. I love the excitement no, not the excitement, sorry, the energy today. This has been a very engaging session. Please keep it up. We have one more for this week at the end of the week, Friday. I know it's usually not the best time for a lot of university students, but this is what I'm telling you earlier, guys, just so you can prep that in mind, yeah. But thank you so much once again. I also keep encouraging you guys to come in with your teammates so that, both of you can at least get same knowledge. Then now how you perceive it and interpret it can be different, but at least you all have like centralized information. But for those that can't make it, hey, taking one for the team is still something we absolutely encourage here. All right. So for the spas, I will keep you guys posted, but I already see 3 to 4 speakers, which is great. This is lovely. Excuse the noise. So yeah, we'll keep that in mind, but the spas will be for next week. So we'll do spas and then continue it's part of the workshop. So we'll keep you guys excited as we build up to the tournament. As you've had, the US delegate is very excited to come back. So show them what you guys have got. You can't say you're not ready this time around. I have given you materials. We've done this. So not ready is not an excuse, guys. I'm not gonna stand here and say you'll say that. No, we're not taking that. But thank you so much. I will leave the floor 1 more minute for you guys to finalize whether it's questions or comments, and then have Isabel close for us as well. Yeah.
And I'll say as well, Farissa, I think I might have a debater on my end for next week if you need anyone else for the spars.
Lovely. Yeah, that will be perfect. That will be perfect. That will be perfect. Yeah, I will contact you on that.
We'll message.
12, 13, and 16.
Yes, Yusuf.
Is there any more time for questions, right?
Please, yes.
Well, I think when we were discussing about the ideas which we have after looking on the topic proposed, on the topic to be used in this tournament, well, our main arguments were typically centered on comparing between these two systems and how they can influence a just migration system. Now, it came to my mind that this might be similar to a police debate in some other format of debate, specifically all school debate. But there is one thing of which maybe we've not discussed it through this discussion, and I would like to ask whether it will be also advised to use that in this tournament. And that thing is, normally when we were discussing that, our discussion was merely discussing on how this one is less effective than the other, or the one is more effective than the other, right? But under policy debate, most of the time, after coming with your idea that this system is less effective than the other, then you come with alternative method. Is this method also applicable in this kind of tournament? That after I've suggested that the common market practice is less effective maybe than this other system, but alternatively, we can use this and this method. Would this be applicable and advised to be used?
Yeah, so let me see if I understand what you're saying. And great question, by the way. I think this is a great thing to ask. So you're talking about like could you question the common market like effectiveness and say that there's something that should be better? Is that the question?
That's it.
Yeah. So and this is where, and I encourage everyone to look at the like topic statement, and this is in the chat, and maybe Farissa you can drop it as well. Because I know that like Eben and the folks who wrote the topic statement did a really great job explaining like what the parameters sort of the debate are, because the answer for you is sometimes in social justice debates we do debate like how effective is this, and sometimes we don't. What I would say is we usually, and this is true of, I don't know about policy debate, which is I think what you were coming from, but true of lots of debates, is we're not going to necessarily debate the implementation, right? Like, oh, well, the politics would never do this or whatever. But we can debate, like I would say, yes, you can debate how effective it is, and that's something that the expert judges live, right? Like they don't live in these debate worlds with fiat where I can wave a magic wand and make things happen. So they want to know, like, hey, if I implement this, is it actually going to do what it says it's going to do, and how long will it take? So I would say the problem is some judges, and again, read the topic statement to make sure that it's not already outlined there, sort of what the parameters are. I just can't remember off the top of my head. But I would say it's totally fair, and you should be thinking, especially in your research, about is this effective? But definitely like have some arguments. Okay, I'm going to argue it's not effective and it won't work. Have another argument as well, right? Like you should also argue like, hey, even if you don't buy what I said about how it's actually never going to work how you envisioned it or whatever, it's still bad because of these reasons, right? So take them at their best and then argue against them. But I think those are good arguments to have. And I think part of what you asked and what Ebenezer also asked is, should you provide alternative methods? I don't know necessarily that this debate implies alternatives, because they're pretty laid out, right? Let me go back to the earlier slides. Sorry, this is hopefully not making anyone nauseous. Is affirmative has to pretty much argue for the common market protocol, and then negative has to sort of argue for isolated recruitment and protection measures. So I don't know how much wiggle room that gives us with use to alternatives. That's something like for the SPAR debates and things we can sort of figure out. Again, our folks, have not started writing cases yet, but I think those are the alternative methods, right? Are the isolated recruitment and protection means. So hopefully that I was trying to answer Ebenezer's and Yusuf's question. Let me know if that makes sense, or if you have any follow-ups on that.
Yes, it does. And as you have said, not all of the motions maybe will be requiring us to compare. So yes, this motion in front of us need to compare between the common market protocol and the associated recruitment and protection methods. So sometimes you might find that there is only one thing of which one side is affirming that this thing is right and need to be done, and other team is denying its effectiveness or whatsoever. So my question was generally, not only in this motion which we have in front of us, but under this system and this format, because some of us are new for in SJD, right? So under this format, am I allowed also to provide alternative methods, as it has been simply put by Ebenezer? Like sometimes we are just comparing whether this thing is good or bad. Then after saying that it's bad, am I allowed to come with alternative method or alternative measure?
Yes. So when it's not laid out like this, like an either or, right, you can do that, right? So there is that freedom. This year for the social justice debates in the US, the national tournament, we were debating housing, and the negative had to argue for immediate permanent housing. And the affirmative was proposing lots of different methods, from like, shelters to basic income to other things to deal with housing injustice. So unless it's laid out, and like I think this is pretty specific in the topic statement, but otherwise, yes, you can provide alternatives and things like that. Again, you have to follow the debate rules, right? So like you have to make sure it's mutually exclusive. Is this something that the affirmative and the negative side can advocate for? Is it something only your side can advocate for? All those other debate rules, right, still sort of apply. But broadly, yes, you can provide alternatives when it's not phrased like this. Awesome. And really great question. I'm excited to see you. I'm excited to see you debate. All right. Unless there's any more questions, that's gonna be it for me. Again, my name is Isabel Birney. I'm one of the UVM coaches. I'm really excited to see you all in person come June. I'll be at the tournament in Arusha, I believe. And please, reach out to your folks. And I'm excited. I'm excited to have this debate. And as was said, maybe there's some new people to social justice debates. It's one of my favorite styles of debate, and I'm really looking forward to watching these debates.
Thank you so much, Isabel. I believe with the questions and the engagement, people have thoroughly enjoyed and learned today's session. I really want to speak for them, so you can just pass on the the message. Lovely. Gabrielle says, "Thanks a lot, Isabel. Had a wonderful time during the session and have learned a lot." So yeah, seems like I was speaking on behalf. But anyways. Yeah, so I'll keep you guys updated on the spas and the many more sessions, particularly the one on cross-examination. I think that's definitely one of the crucial sessions we need to have. So don't worry, we'll try not to get in between your school sessions. So yeah, but if you have an alternative of time, let us know. But remember, we're working with like 7 hour differences, so one of us sacrifices. Anyways, yes, thank you so much, guys. I think we can end it here. We can just say final goodbyes, then we'll see each other on Friday. Thank you, Ebenezer, as well. Excited to have the high school teams. I'm so happy. You have no idea. Yeah, UWC doing its thing. Yeah, and Gabriella from Jaffrey and other universities. Very excited, guys. Neville as well. Looking forward to many more. Wonderful. Yeah, you can leave by the way as you say your goodbyes, just so that I know how many and how
Here,
long
I'll
I
stop
can.
sharing. There we go too. And make sure you stop the recording as well and grab that.
Stopping it.